Who gave you the right to rip my son's hoop out of the ground? I screamed at the empty driveway, my voice echoing off the quiet suburban cul-de-sac. The words tore out of me before I could even think. My hands were shaking, my breath uneven. I stood there, staring at the bare patch of concrete where my son's basketball hoop had stood just that morning. All that was left now were 4 sheared-off bolts jutting from the cement and a dark ring of fresh oil stain. The air smelled of cut grass and metal. It was early evening, that time of day when the sun dips low and the world looks peaceful. But nothing about this moment was calm. The wind carried the faint sound of a bouncing ball from somewhere down the street, and it only twisted the knife deeper. This wasn't just any hoop. My late husband, David, had installed it 5 years ago, the summer before he got sick. He poured that cement himself, sweating through July heat, laughing as Ethan, our son, tried to help with a plastic shovel. That hoop wasn't just a piece of metal. It was a memory, a promise, and a symbol of the time we thought we still had. Now, it was gone. I crouched down, running my hand over the rough concrete edge where the pole used to be. The bolts were cleanly cut. Someone had come here with tools, real tools, and purpose. My chest tightened as anger replaced shock. This wasn't random vandalism. This was ordered. I looked up and spotted my neighbor, Carol, watching from across the street. Her lips pressed into a nervous line before she spoke. "Sarah, I tried to stop them," she whispered, stepping closer. "Mark Hollister said it was against community policy. He called a contractor this morning while you were at work. They took it down before lunch. For a second, I couldn't breathe." Mark Hollister, the HOA president, a man with a permanent scowl and a pressed polo shirt that looked like it had never seen a wrinkle. The kind of man who treated this neighborhood like his personal kingdom. I'd heard stories, him sending fines for unapproved garden decorations, even threatening to sue a veteran for hanging a flag on the wrong day. But this was personal. "He didn't even tell me?" I asked, my voice cracking. Carol shook her head. "He said it was an eyesore. Said he was within his rights." I felt something shift inside me, something sharp and determined. Grief had lived in my house long enough. Now it was time for anger to take a seat. I walked back to the spot where the hoop once stood, the same spot where David and Ethan used to shoot hoops until the porch light came on. I could still hear the thump of the ball, the clang of the rim, David's voice laughing. "You'll make it next time, champ." I swallowed hard and looked up at the empty sky. "You picked the wrong woman," I muttered under my breath. That night, after putting Ethan to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with the letter that had started it. The words felt like a slap when I read them again. "Your basketball structure violates HOA guidelines for external aesthetic harmony." I could almost hear Hollister's smug tone behind those words, that bureaucratic blend of fake politeness and quiet cruelty. I opened my laptop, heart pounding, and searched, "Can an HOA remove property without consent?" Page after page of legal jargon filled my screen, but one sentence stood out. "An HOA cannot remove personal property from a homeowner's land without due process or written consent." My pulse quickened. Written consent. I never gave any. My fingers hovered over the phone. I dialed the county zoning office, my jaw clenched. If Hollister thought I'd just roll over, he didn't know me at all. When the line clicked and a calm voice answered, I said, "Hi, my name's Sarah Collins. I need to ask about HOA authority. Specifically, what they can and can't remove from private driveways." The woman paused before responding, her tone changing. "They can't remove anything without a violation hearing or a court order." Did they? I looked out the window, at the empty space under the fading orange sky. "Yes," I said quietly, "they did." And that's when I knew. This wasn't just about a basketball hoop anymore. This was about control, about power, and I was done letting them have it. The next morning, I planned to walk into the county office myself, and what I found there would change everything I thought I knew about this HOA. $500? For what? Existing. I slammed the letter on the counter so hard that my coffee mug rattled. The HOA's logo at the top of the page looked smug. A neat little tree with perfect leaves, the same symbol I now wanted to set on fire. The words underneath were worse. Notice of fine. Non-compliance with board directive. My heart thudded in my chest as I read the details. Apparently, removing the basketball hoop did not resolve the aesthetic violation, and I was being fined for failure to comply with HOA order. It was absurd. They took the hoop down. They invaded my property without permission, and now they were fining me for their own crime? The paper crinkled under my fingers as I crushed it into a ball. The audacity was unbelievable. That night, after Ethan went to bed, I drove to the HOA clubhouse, a sterile, overlit room that smelled like burnt coffee and cheap carpet. The board meeting was in session. Mark Hollister sat at the head of the long table, polo tucked neatly into khakis, posture straight as a ruler. His eyes flicked to me like I was an interruption instead of a homeowner. "Ah, Miss Collins," he said, smirking over the rim of his coffee mug. "Glad you could join us. I trust you received our notice." "Oh, I received it," I shot back, holding up the wrinkled letter. "What I don't understand is why I'm being fined for something you had removed without consent." He didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned back in his chair and said, "We're protecting property values, Miss Collins. Basketball hoops are prohibited. Show me where that's written," I demanded. "Which section? Which line?" The other board members, 3 middle-aged neighbors who wouldn't meet my eyes, shuffled papers nervously. Hollister didn't look away. "I don't need to quote it. The rule falls under temporary structures and community aesthetics." I could smell the stale pastries laid out on the counter, untouched. The air in that room felt thick with arrogance. My nails dug into my palms as I forced myself not to yell. "Then cite it in writing," I said coldly, "because as far as I can tell, there's no specific ban on basketball hoops in the bylaws." That got his attention. His smirk twitched. "Ms. Collins, challenging the board's authority will only make this worse for you." "I'll take my chances," I replied, turning on my heel. When I got home, I spent hours combing through the HOA bylaws online. I read every clause, every numbered section, my eyes burning under the desk lamp. And sure enough, Hollister had lied. The only reference was to temporary play structures obstructing sidewalks. My hoop had been permanently installed in my driveway, on my property. There was no violation. None. That's when I learned my first legal nugget of HOA warfare. Always demand written citations. Never trust verbal warnings. If they can't quote the rule, they can't enforce it. The next morning, I typed a formal challenge letter. Concise, documented, and sent via certified mail. I quoted the sections, attached photos, and requested a written explanation. I thought maybe, just maybe, that would make them back off. 2 days later, another envelope arrived. I tore it open, already bracing myself, but the number staring back at me still hit like a punch. Fine increased to $1,000 due to continued non-compliance. My stomach turned. My hands trembled with rage. I marched straight to Hollister's office. He didn't even look surprised when I burst in. "I warned you," he said, not even pretending to be polite. "You can pay it, or we'll place a lien on your property. Your choice." I wanted to scream, to throw the letter in his smug face, but I knew better. I took a slow breath, leaned forward and said, "You just made the biggest mistake of your career." He laughed softly, swirling his coffee. "You'll learn how things work here, Ms. Collins." "Everyone does." I walked out, my pulse pounding in my ears, my anger burning hotter than ever. For the first time, I realized what this was. Not about aesthetics, not about rules. This was about control. Hollister didn't want order. He wanted obedience. That evening, as I stood on my porch, the sun setting behind the trees, I noticed someone watching from across the street. A neighbor I didn't know well. Older, quiet, usually kept to himself. He crossed the street slowly, looking over his shoulder before handing me a folded piece of paper. "Be careful," he murmured. "They've done worse to others." Inside the paper, scribbled in shaky handwriting, were 6 words that made my blood run cold. "Check the boards past. You're not alone." I stared at those words, heart pounding. What had the HOA done? And to who? "So I'm not their first target?" I muttered, flipping through the old meeting minutes spread across my kitchen table. The papers smelled faintly of mildew and old toner ink, like they hadn't been touched in years. My hands trembled as I read line after line of names and fines, dates and violations. What I was seeing didn't look like community management. It looked like a pattern. The neighbor who had slipped me that note, his name was George. He'd been here since the neighborhood was built, and when I went to thank him, he told me something that made my stomach turn. "You think Hollister's tough on you," he said, shaking his head. "You should have seen what he did to Henry Bell, Vietnam vet, lived 3 doors down. Fined him for flying the American flag on a pole instead of a wall mount. When Henry refused to take it down, they dragged him into court. He sold his house a month later." That was just the beginning. As I dug deeper, I found record after record of fines for petty, arbitrary reasons. A widow forced to remove her rose garden for being non-uniform. A single mother cited for hanging laundry out to dry. An elderly man threatened with foreclosure over a missing mailbox number. These weren't rules. They were weapons. I needed someone who knew how this board really worked. That's when George mentioned Tom Jenkins. "Used to be vice president," he said. "Good guy. Quit 2 years ago." Said Hollister was cooking the books. That phrase, "cooking the books," echoed in my head as I tracked Tom down. He lived a few streets over in a modest ranch house, the kind of place with wind chimes on the porch and a garden full of overgrown tomatoes. When I knocked, he opened the door cautiously, but when I mentioned Hollister's name, his eyes narrowed with recognition. "You've had a run-in too, huh?" he said, waving me in. Inside, the house smelled like coffee and old paper. His dining table was covered with binders. HOA records, receipts, budget drafts. "I kept copies," he said, sliding one binder toward me. "Because I knew this day would come." I flipped it open and froze. There were handwritten notes in the margins. Unapproved purchase, $2,400 landscaping contract, friend of Hollister. Another note. Security cameras installed, no invoices filed. "This is fraud," I whispered. Tom nodded grimly. "Selective enforcement, misuse of funds, shady contracts. Hollister treats the HOA like his personal kingdom. He finds who he doesn't like, waives rules, for his friends. It's been that way for years." My blood boiled as I turned the pages. I'd been angry before, but this was different. This was clarity. This was proof that my fight wasn't just about a basketball hoop. It was about every homeowner who'd been silenced or intimidated. That's when Tom leaned back, looking at me carefully. "You know, Sarah, most people just pay the fines and stay quiet. You digging into this? It's going to make you a target." "Then let him come," I said, voice steady. "I'm done being scared." Tom gave a small smile, a mix of respect and pity, then pointed to a page showing HOA land maps. "You see this?" he said, tracing his finger over a shaded square. "That's the common lot behind your fence. The HOA technically owns it, but it's community property, open-use land." I frowned. "The overgrown field, the one with weeds taller than my kid? That's the one." He nodded. "They've ignored it for years. Never touched it, never maintained it. Hollister keeps saying they'll develop it, but they never do. I think he just wants to control who uses it." I looked closer at the map, my pulse quickening. Common use property, shared land, not private HOA space. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in weeks. Possibility. "Tom," I said slowly, already forming an idea in my mind. "What if I used that land?" He raised an eyebrow. "Used it how?" I smiled faintly. "Let's just say, if they took my hoop, maybe it's time I build something bigger, something they can't touch." Legal nugget. HOAs must provide budget disclosures upon written request. It's the law. Tom chuckled, shaking his head. You've got guts, Sarah Collins. Just be ready. Once Hollister catches wind of this, he won't go down quietly. I closed the binder and stood. Good, neither will I. Tom glanced out his window toward the field behind my house. That land's common property, he said quietly. They never touch it, but if you do, Hollister's going to lose his mind. You want to play games, Hollister? I'll build the whole arena. The words came out before I even realized I'd said them. Half a whisper, half a dare to the man who thought he could break me. Standing on my back porch, I looked out at the wild stretch of land behind my fence. An unkempt mess of weeds, beer cans, and half-collapsed picnic benches. The kind of place that once might have been meant for neighborhood gatherings but had long since been forgotten. The late afternoon sun painted everything gold, and for a second I imagined what it could be. A real basketball court, smooth and bright, where kids could play without fear of violating aesthetics. I could almost hear the sound of bouncing balls and laughter again. The sound that used to fill my driveway before Hollister's goons tore it away. But imagination wasn't enough. I needed to know who actually owned this land. The next morning I drove to the county planning office, the same one that confirmed Hollister had overstepped when he removed my hoop. The place smelled of dust and old paper, the kind of scent that lingers in government buildings where secrets hide in file drawers. I'm looking for land records on Brookside Meadows HOA, I told the clerk, who barely looked up from her screen. She handed me a clipboard. Fill this out. It's public record. You'll get copies in a few minutes. I filled it out, my hand steady for once. When she returned with a thick folder, I sat down at a long wooden table and flipped through the maps. There it was. The rectangular patch behind my fence, marked Lot 17C, designated Common Recreation Area. My eyes widened. Recreation Area. Common use. I scanned the small print under the heading, Ownership vested jointly in all homeowners of Brookside Meadows, maintained by HOA board as trustee only. My breath caught. Hollister didn't own it. He only managed it, and he'd done a terrible job. That overgrown lot wasn't his property. It was ours. I felt a rush of adrenaline so strong it almost made me dizzy. For the first time since this nightmare began, the balance of power had shifted, and it was in my hands. Legal nugget. Common use land belongs to all homeowners, not the board president's ego. That phrase would become my mantra. When I drove home, the sun was setting, casting long orange shadows across that neglected field. I kicked off my shoes, climbed the fence, and stepped onto the dirt. The weeds brushed against my jeans, dry and scratchy, but all I could see was potential. The ground was uneven, full of stones and trash, but to me, it felt like freedom. I walked the perimeter slowly, pacing out the boundaries like my husband once did when we measured for the original hoop. Each step brought back memories. His laugh, the smell of sawdust, the way Ethan used to run barefoot in the driveway pretending to be Michael Jordan. And then the idea took full shape in my mind. I wasn't just going to rebuild the hoop. I was going to build a full-scale basketball court. For Ethan, for the neighborhood, for everyone Hollister had bullied into silence. This wouldn't be rebellion. It would be justice poured in concrete. I grabbed an old wooden stake from my garage, a leftover from a gardening project, and hammered it into the corner of the field. The sound echoed under the moonlight, a single sharp thunk that felt like a promise. Game on, I whispered to the dark. The crickets were the only witnesses, their song blending with the rustle of dry grass. I felt a sense of calm I hadn't felt in weeks. No more fear, no more hesitation. Just focus. I didn't even notice the motion light flicker on from a house down the street. It wasn't until I turned back toward my fence that I saw him, standing at the edge of the road, arms crossed, his outline framed by the yellow glow of the street lamp. Mark Hollister. Even from a distance, I could see the disbelief on his face as he watched me. Shovel in hand, dirt on my jeans, and that wooden stake gleaming in the moonlight. His jaw tightened. He didn't shout. He didn't move. He just stared. And in that silent stare, I saw what I'd been waiting for all along, the moment he realized he no longer had control. Hollister turned and walked away briskly, pulling out his phone. Whatever he was planning, I knew it wouldn't be friendly, but this time, I wasn't backing down. "Pour the slab," I yelled. "We're not stopping this time." My voice carried across the empty lot, slicing through the cool night air like a battle cry. The portable work lights buzzed softly, casting long shadows over the patch of dirt that was about to become something more. A court, a stand, a statement. Tom was already knee-deep in the mix, sweat glistening on his forehead despite the chill. "Keep it coming," he shouted back, his shovel scraping against the concrete mixer. My son, Ethan, bounced excitedly beside him, holding a trowel almost too big for his hands. "Mom, are we really doing this?" he asked, his eyes wide with that same spark I hadn't seen since his dad passed. "Oh, we're doing it," I said, steadying the wooden frame we'd built earlier that day. "And we're doing it right." The smell of wet cement filled the air, earthy, sharp, and alive. Every sound seemed to echo louder under the night sky. The slosh of the mixer, the scrape of metal, the thud of boots on soil. It wasn't just construction. It was defiance. We worked in rhythm, like an unspoken symphony. Tom poured, I leveled, and Ethan spread the gravel under the glow of floodlights powered by a long, orange extension cord snaking from our garage. The retired contractor, a kind old man named Carl who'd heard about our fight, joined in too. "Haven't felt this alive in years," he said, laughing as he guided the rebar into place. Hours passed, but none of us wanted to stop. My hands ached, my back burned, but I didn't care. Each shovelful of concrete felt like reclaiming something they'd stolen. Not just our hoop, but our dignity. When the slab was finally level, I brushed my palms together and stared down at the smooth gray surface. It glistened faintly under the lights, solid and permanent. A foundation that no letter, no fine, no smug HOA president could erase. That afternoon, before we even started, I had filed a small used construction permit with the county office. It wasn't much, just a single-page form and a small fee. But it was all the legality I needed. The HOA couldn't touch me here. Legal nugget. County permits override HOA objections on public land. We were cleaning up when headlights swept across the field. The car screeched to a stop at the curb, and I felt my stomach twist. Out stepped Mark Hollister, in a pressed jacket and fury written all over his face. "What in God's name do you think you're doing?" he barked, stomping toward us. I turned slowly, wiping the cement dust from my hands. "Building," I said simply. "You're trespassing on HOA grounds," he shouted, his voice cracking with rage. Tom straightened up beside me. "This isn't HOA land, Mark. It's common property, shared. Don't lecture me about the bylaws," he snapped. I took a slow breath, looked him dead in the eye, and said calmly, "Then call the sheriff." For the first time, Hollister hesitated. The lights flickered across his pale, furious face as he stood there, jaw clenched, realizing he'd just lost control. And for the first time, I felt the fear leave me completely. He pulled out his phone, muttering something under his breath. I knew exactly who he was calling, but this time I wasn't afraid of the badge showing up. I was counting on it. "Let him call. I've got paperwork that'll bury his threats." The words left my mouth like a dare, sharp and steady, as Hollister's finger hovered over his phone. He stared at me for a beat, then smirked. That tight, cold kind of smirk that told me he thought he still held all the cards. "Fine," he spat. "You want the law involved? You got it." He pressed the dial, pacing in the dirt as the night air hung heavy between us. The lights from our work lamps cast his shadow long and warped across the half-dried concrete, making him look almost monstrous. 15 minutes later, red and blue lights flashed against the fences. The sheriff's cruiser rolled to a stop, its headlights cutting across the field. My heart thumped hard, but not with fear, with focus. Hollister immediately stormed toward the deputy, as if the man worked for him. "Officer, thank God you're here," he barked. These people are illegally constructing a permanent structure on HOA land. They refuse to stop even after I ordered them to. The sheriff, a broad-shouldered man with calm eyes, stepped out slowly. He took one look at Hollister, then turned his gaze to me. "Ma'am, can I see your paperwork?" "Of course," I said, already reaching into my folder. My hands were dusty but steady as I handed over the county permit, stamped and dated. "Filed 2 days ago. County-approved small-use recreational permit for common ground." The sheriff scanned it under his flashlight. "Looks legitimate," he said. Hollister's voice cracked, shrill with disbelief. "That's impossible. She can't just—" "She can," the sheriff interrupted, his tone even but firm. "If this is designated community land and the county's approved the permit, she's within her rights." You could feel the energy shift. The night went still except for the hum of the cruiser engine. A few porch lights flicked on down the street. Neighbors watching from a distance, curious and silent witnesses to Hollister's humiliation. He sputtered, "You don't understand. She's destroying property values. She's challenging board authority." The sheriff sighed. "Sir, I'm not here for your politics. I'm here to make sure no one's breaking the law. And from what I see, the only problem here is how late everyone's out working." A chuckle rippled through the small group. Even Tom couldn't hide his smirk. Hollister's face turned red. "Unbelievable," he muttered, his voice low but venomous. "You'll regret this, Sarah." He stormed off toward his SUV, gravel crunching under his shoes. The taillights glared like angry eyes as he sped off into the night. I exhaled slowly, letting the adrenaline drain out of me. For the first time, I didn't feel small or powerless. I felt grounded, solid, like the concrete beneath my feet. Legal nugget. In one-party consent states, record all HOA confrontations for protection. Later that night, after we cleaned up and put away the tools, I stood at the edge of the driveway watching the quiet street. For a moment, it felt peaceful, the kind of calm that comes after a storm, until I heard the metallic clang from the end of the lane. I walked out slowly, the crunch of gravel under my shoes echoing too loudly in the silence. My mailbox door hung open, twisted and dented, the inside filled with shattered glass from the light fixture above it. A scrap of paper fluttered against the wind, caught on the edge of the box. I pulled it free and unfolded it. Scrawled in jagged marker were 4 words that froze my blood cold. "This isn't over yet." The wind picked up, carrying that note down the street as I stood there under the flickering porch light, realizing Hollister wasn't backing off. He was just getting started. "They think fear will shut me up? Watch me double down." The words came out of me like venom, low and certain, as I crumpled yet another HOA letter in my hand. The paper was slick with sweat, the 4th one that week. Each envelope carried a new punishment, a new threat, a new reminder that Hollister was far from finished. First came the fines. They stacked up like some cruel joke. $250 for unauthorized use of common property, $150 for noise disturbance, and one that actually made me laugh through my anger. $75 for disruptive lighting after dusk. Those disruptive lights were the small lamps we'd been using to work on the court after dark. Then came the real harassment. My family's pool access cards were suddenly deactivated. When I asked why, the HOA's office clerk, a woman I'd seen mowing Hollister's lawn more than once, shrugged and said it was a technical error. A day later, another noise complaint arrived in the mail, this one accusing me of late-night parties. The only sound that night had been the soft thud of concrete drying and my son's laughter echoing in the distance. I realized quickly what this was. A campaign of exhaustion. Hollister wanted to wear me down, make me so tired and paranoid that I'd stop fighting. But he underestimated just how stubborn grief can make a person. So I fought back, not with yelling, but with paper. Every letter, every complaint, every fine, I documented. I took photos of every envelope, noted the date and time of delivery, even recorded conversations with board members when possible. Every email I sent to the HOA was carbon copied to my own lawyer friend, and every voicemail Hollister left me was saved in a separate folder labeled evidence. If Hollister wanted a war, I was going to give him one in writing. But even with my resolve, the constant pressure began to take its toll. I barely slept. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. to the sound of phantom footsteps or headlights crawling across the walls, wondering if someone was outside again. Every creak in the house made my pulse spike. Ethan noticed too. The way I jumped at noises, the way I stared too long at unopened mail. One evening, Tom stopped by with groceries. He looked me over and said quietly, "He's trying to isolate you, Sarah. That's how he wins." "I know," I said, "but it's not working." And it wasn't. Because slowly, quietly, the neighborhood was changing. It started small. Mrs. Perez from down the block dropped off cookies with a note that said, "We're proud of you." Then two dads brought over extra wood for the court fence, saying their kids couldn't wait to play there. Even Carol, who'd once avoided eye contact when Hollister was around, came to help repaint the faded lines on the court. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like it was just me versus them. It was us, a neighborhood waking up from fear. The exhaustion didn't vanish overnight, but something stronger began to take root. Solidarity. And that was something Hollister couldn't find, suspend, or threaten out of existence. Late one evening, as I was stacking papers in my growing evidence binder, my phone buzzed. The number was unknown. I hesitated before hitting play on the voicemail. "This is Channel 9 News," the message began. "We heard about your story, Ms. Collins. We'd like to talk." I froze, the air thick around me. Finally, someone outside this neighborhood was paying attention. I looked out the window toward the glowing court, heart racing. Hollister wanted to silence me. But what happens when the whole town starts listening? "You wanted attention, Mark? Smile for the camera." I muttered those words under my breath as the Channel 9 van rolled up to the curb, its antenna stretching toward the morning sky like a spear of justice. The air was cool, the kind of crispness that feels like a clean slate. Fitting, because I was about to rewrite my neighborhood story. The reporter, a young woman named Dana, stepped out with a microphone in hand and an easy smile. "Ms. Collins," she asked, "we heard you've been having some trouble with your HOA." "Trouble might be an understatement," I said, leading her toward the court. The field was still half finished. One side smooth concrete, the other lined with wooden stakes and dirt piles. But even in that state, it felt powerful. The morning sun glinted off the rebar, catching in the air like defiance itself. As the camera crew set up, I noticed neighbors trickling out of their houses, pretending to grab mail or walk their dogs. But really, they were watching. Word spread fast in Brookside Meadows, and everyone knew the news was here for me. Dana gestured for me to stand beside the court. "Just tell us what happened in your own words," she said. So I did. I told them about the hoop being torn out, the fines, the threats, the destroyed mailbox. I showed the letters, the photos, and the permit. I told them how Hollister tried to bully a grieving family into submission. And as I spoke, my voice didn't shake. It carried. Strong, steady, unafraid. The segment aired that evening during prime time. The footage was simple but powerful, a mother standing beside her unfinished court, her son bouncing a basketball in the background, and the words HOA harassment flashing across the bottom of the screen. The response was explosive. My phone didn't stop ringing for hours, neighbors cheering, old friends reaching out, strangers online calling me brave. Even the HOA Facebook page, which had always been a shrine to Hollister's control, filled with angry comments demanding answers. Hollister, of course, couldn't resist responding. Channel 9 caught up with him the next day outside the HOA office. I watched from my couch as he fumbled through his interview, sweat glistening under the camera lights. "This is all grossly exaggerated," he said, forcing a chuckle. "Our actions were entirely within HOA bylaws. We're a peaceful community." Then the reporter asked, "Can you explain why the HOA spent over $12,000 on landscaping improvements that don't appear anywhere in the neighborhood?" His smile faltered. "No comment." Legal nugget. Misuse of HOA funds can trigger state audits under nonprofit laws. That single sentence in the broadcast set everything in motion. The next morning, the county office was flooded with complaints. Not just from my neighborhood, but from nearby HOAs too. People were angry, awake, and suddenly unafraid to question authority. When I checked my voicemail later that week, there was one message that made my breath catch. A calm male voice said, "Ms. Collins, this is Inspector Ramirez with the County Regulatory Office. We've reviewed the footage and your documentation. I wanted to inform you that we've opened an official investigation into your HOA." I sat there for a long moment, the phone still pressed to my ear. My hands were trembling, not from fear this time, but from adrenaline and relief. After months of battling alone, the law was finally stepping in. I glanced toward the court through my window, lights glinting off the concrete. For the first time, I didn't just feel like a homeowner. I felt like a storm was coming, and this time, it wasn't mine. "Let's see how tough you are when the county's at your door." Those were the words I muttered under my breath the morning the inspectors showed up at the Brookside Meadows HOA office. Their white county van rolled down the street like a silent verdict, stopping right in front of Hollister's precious little clubhouse, the same place he'd once humiliated me in front of my neighbors. This time, though, he was the one about to be questioned. The inspectors, two of them, both in plain clothes but carrying clipboards and badges, walked up the front steps while a few of us concerned residents watched from the sidewalk. Tom stood beside me, arms crossed, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "About time," he said. I nodded, my pulse quick but steady. It had been almost a week since the Channel 9 story aired, and the ripple effect had been enormous. Dozens of residents filed formal complaints. The county had no choice but to launch a full audit of the HOA's finances. The very system Hollister had used to control everyone was now being dissected by the same bureaucracy he'd always hidden behind. Inside the office, we could see him through the window, pacing, gesturing wildly. His perfectly pressed shirt looked rumpled for the first time since I'd met him. The inspectors didn't flinch. They were calm, methodical, flipping through binders, pointing at documents, asking questions he clearly didn't want to answer. By noon, whispers had already started spreading through the neighborhood. Words like missing funds and false reimbursements floated through the air like wildfire. One neighbor said the HOA had billed the community for security cameras that were never installed. Another claimed Hollister approved a $10,000 landscaping project to a company owned by his cousin. When the county truck finally pulled away that afternoon, Hollister didn't come outside for a long time. But the next morning, a notice appeared in every mailbox. Effective immediately, HOA President Mark Hollister has resigned due to health reasons. The board will appoint an interim president pending election. Health reasons. The coward couldn't even face his downfall honestly. That evening, Tom knocked on my door. "They want me to serve as acting president," he said quietly. "I'm not sure I want the job, but someone's got to clean up his mess." I smiled. "You're the right person for it. The neighborhood needs someone decent at the wheel for once." Within days, Tom called a community-wide meeting in the same clubhouse where Hollister had ruled with an iron fist. But the room felt different this time. Lighter, freer. The folding chairs were filled with residents who, for the first time, weren't afraid to speak. Tom stood at the front, hands steady, and cleared his throat. "The county audit found several discrepancies in our financials," he began. "Funds missing, fake invoices, unauthorized projects. It's all in the report, and it's being turned over to the state attorney's office." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some gasped, others clapped quietly. I sat near the back, watching the faces around me, people who had once looked defeated, now holding their heads a little higher. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt united. Then Tom said something that made the room erupt into applause. "There's one more motion we're voting on tonight. To permanently bar Mark Hollister from ever serving on the HOA board again." The vote wasn't close. Every hand went up. Even Carol, who used to tremble whenever Hollister spoke, raised hers with a firm, confident smile. I felt my throat tighten, not from anger this time, but from release, the kind of emotion that builds for so long it becomes part of your bones. This wasn't just a win for me. It was a win for everyone he'd bullied, fined, and threatened into silence. Legal nugget: audit requests can be filed by any homeowner, not just board members. After the vote, Tom turned to me. "He'll never run this neighborhood again," he said. I looked at the community around me, at the neighbors shaking hands, at Ethan shooting hoops under the new lights across the field, and felt something I hadn't in months: peace. Just as the meeting ended, Tom's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen and frowned before handing it to me. The message was short and chilling. "Tell Sarah Collins I'm not done." They tore down a hoop. I built a symbol. I said it out loud that evening as I stood at the edge of the new court, watching the glow of the nightlights stretch across the smooth concrete. The same spot that once looked like a forgotten lot now pulsed with life. Laughter, bouncing basketballs, and the faint rhythm of someone's Bluetooth speaker filled the air. The smell of fresh paint and cut grass mixed with the sweetness of victory. After weeks of inspections, meetings, and signatures, the new HOA board, under Tom's leadership, voted unanimously to designate the basketball court as an official community facility. It was no longer Sarah's rebellion. It was Brookside's court. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The field Hollister once ignored, the land he claimed was too problematic to use, had become the heartbeat of the entire neighborhood. Families came in waves that first night. Kids who used to keep their distance from me were now racing across the asphalt, shouting for turns. Parents brought folding chairs and coolers, chatting under the soft white glow of the lights we'd installed. The rhythmic thunk-thunk of the basketball echoed like music, steady, hopeful, alive. I stood near the edge of the court, my hands tucked into my jacket pockets, just taking it all in. For months, this space had been a battlefield. Now, it was a sanctuary. Ethan was laughing again, playing one-on-one with a neighbor's kid, the way he used to with his dad. Watching him dribble and shoot, I felt that ache in my chest ease just a little. When the sun finally disappeared, Tom walked over with a small cardboard box in his hands. "Got something for you," he said, smiling. Inside was a bronze plaque, polished and simple. The inscription made my throat tighten. "In memory of Dad, every shot counts." We drilled it into the fence post together, the metal cool beneath my fingertips. The light hit it perfectly, the engraved letters glowing faintly against the backdrop of the court. I traced the words once, whispering, "You'd be proud of us, David." Tom clapped a hand on my shoulder. "You turned pain into purpose, Sarah. That's something no HOA rulebook could ever stop." For a while, we just stood there in silence, watching the court alive with joy. The sound of sneakers squeaking, the echo of laughter. It was all the proof I needed that this fight had been worth every sleepless night, every letter, every fine. And it wasn't just me who'd changed. The entire community felt different, freer. Neighbors who used to hide behind curtains when Hollister walked by were now organizing weekend games, painting benches, and talking about turning the field's edge into a small garden. The fear that had gripped everyone for years was gone, replaced with something stronger. Ownership, belonging, pride. When the lights finally dimmed around 10 p.m., the crowd drifted home, voices soft, hearts full. I stayed behind, for a few minutes, standing alone on the center court. The concrete still radiated the day's warmth, and above me, the stars looked brighter than they had in months. That's when I saw it, an envelope lying on the hood of my car. White, crisp, official. My stomach sank the moment I saw the return address. Hollister and Dunn, attorneys at law. I tore it open, my hands trembling slightly. The letter inside was typed in that same smug, sterile language I'd come to expect. "Ms. Collins, this correspondence serves as notice of intent to pursue damages related to defamation, harassment, and public misconduct following recent media broadcasts." My jaw tightened, even after being exposed, after losing his title, after humiliating himself in front of the entire county. Hollister still couldn't let it go. I folded the letter slowly, exhaling through my nose. You just don't know when to quit, do you, Mark? I whispered to the dark. The night breeze tugged gently at my hair, and the faint echo of a basketball bounce drifted from across the field, a reminder of what we'd built, what we'd reclaimed. I slipped the letter into my jacket and looked back at the glowing court one last time. Tomorrow, I'd be back in a different kind of court, one with a judge, not a backboard. And this time, I planned to win again. See you in court, Mark. But this time, I'm the one scoring. I said it with a smile I didn't even recognize in myself. Not smug, not angry, but calm. The kind of calm that comes when you already know how the story ends. The courthouse was smaller than I expected, tucked between a tax office and a diner that smelled like burnt coffee and pancakes. The walls inside were beige, the benches wooden and creaky, but to me, it might as well have been Madison Square Garden. This was my arena now. Across the room sat Mark Hollister, his trademark arrogance cracked and fading. His tan had gone pale, his hair thinner, his posture slumped, but his eyes still burned with that same bitter pride. Beside him, his lawyer shuffled papers, whispering something that made him nod stiffly. I didn't bring a lawyer. I didn't need one. I brought something stronger, proof. When the clerk called the case, I walked to the plaintiff's table, my folder clutched tight. Hollister versus Collins, damages, defamation, and public misconduct. It sounded ridiculous even on paper. The judge, a middle-aged woman with sharp glasses and sharper instincts, looked between us. Mr. Hollister, she began, you're alleging that Ms. Collins defamed you through public statements and caused personal damages due to her actions involving HOA property. Is that correct? Yes, Your Honor, he said smoothly, trying to recover his old confidence. She spread falsehoods on television and social media, tarnishing my reputation. Her actions undermined community integrity and— Thank you, the judge interrupted. We'll hear from Ms. Collins now. I stood slowly, heart pounding but voice steady. Your Honor, every statement I made was factual, supported by written records and county documentation. I laid out my folder, photos of the removed hoop, copies of the fines, the permit approved by the county, even the threatening note that had been left in my smashed mailbox. I didn't defame anyone, I continued. I reported truth. The only person who damaged this community was the man sitting across from me. I glanced at Hollister then, and for a second, I saw something flicker. Not rage, not superiority, but fear. The judge flipped through my exhibits, occasionally nodding. These letters are from the HOA. Yes, Your Honor, each signed by Mr. Hollister himself. And this permit is county approved? Yes, Your Honor. Filed 2 days before he called the sheriff. Silence stretched across the room, broken only by the faint hum of the ceiling fan. Hollister's lawyer leaned over to whisper again, but it was too late. The judge looked up, expression unreadable, then turned her gaze toward him. Mr. Hollister, she said slowly, what I see here is a homeowner who followed the law, documented everything, and acted within her rights on community land. I see no evidence of defamation, only of proper civic action. Case dismissed. No damages owed. The gavel hit the block with a sharp crack that echoed like a starting gun in a stadium. My knees almost gave out. Not from weakness, but from the sudden release of everything I'd carried for months. Hollister stood frozen for a moment, then turned toward me with a glare that could have cut glass. But I didn't look away. Not this time. Legal nugget. Courts respect detailed documentation. Facts beat intimidation. Outside the courthouse, the sunlight felt different. Brighter, softer. I stepped out onto the steps, breathing in the clean November air, and for the first time, in what felt like forever, I didn't feel like I was surviving. I felt like I'd won. Tom was waiting by his truck, grinning. Knew you'd crush him, he said. He never stood a chance. Facts don't scare me, I said, smiling back. Bullies do, but not anymore. As we started walking toward the parking lot, a young mother I didn't recognize stopped me. She looked nervous but determined. "You're Sarah Collins, right?" "Yes," I said, surprised. She swallowed hard, then smiled. "I just wanted to say thank you. You gave all of us permission to fight back." Her words hit deeper than any verdict ever could. Because that's when I realized this wasn't just my win. It was a blueprint for everyone who'd ever been pushed, fined, or silenced by people like Mark Hollister. I looked back at the courthouse doors, sunlight glinting off the brass handles, and whispered to myself, one more chapter left, the one where the whole neighborhood takes the shot. They said I couldn't play. Now the whole neighborhood's playing. The words came out soft, but they carried years of weight. I stood at the edge of the court, watching dusk settle over Brookside Meadows. The sky glowed orange, fading to violet, and the new nightlights hummed to life one by one, spilling golden light across the smooth concrete. The faint echo of basketballs bounced through the air, laughter overlapping like music. What had once been a battlefield was now a gathering place. The same neighbors who once crossed the street to avoid Hollister's glare now stood shoulder to shoulder, cheering as kids raced from one end of the court to the other. A grill smoked in the distance. Someone played an old Motown song on a portable speaker, and the melody drifted through the cooling air like a victory hymn. I could still see the ghost of what used to be, the empty lot, the broken mailbox, the late-night threats, but they felt distant now, washed away by something stronger. This wasn't just a win over an HOA. It was the proof that fear only has power when people face it alone. Once one voice rises, others follow. Tom waved from the bleachers, clipboard in hand. He'd just wrapped up the first official Brookside Community Game Night as the new board president. He caught my eye and grinned. "Looks good, doesn't it?" he shouted over the noise. "Better than good," I called back. "It looks alive." He nodded, then went back to talking with a group of volunteers organizing next month's neighborhood cleanup. That was the biggest change of all. People cared again. No one was afraid to suggest things, to question decisions, to stand up for their homes. The fear that Hollister had fed on for years was gone, replaced by something far louder and brighter. I walked over to the small bronze plaque we'd mounted on the fence. The light hit it perfectly at sunset, the words glimmering in the soft orange glow. "In memory of Dad. Every shot counts." I ran my fingers over the engraved letters and smiled. Ethan was at the free throw line, laughing with his friends, his voice cutting through the sound of the ball hitting pavement. I knew David would have loved this, not just the court, but the spirit behind it. I turned to look at the houses lined up beyond the fence. Every porch light was on, warm and steady. The same community that once trembled under a single man's authority now glowed with unity. We didn't just rebuild a basketball court, we rebuilt each other. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Stand up, document everything, and never bow to false authority. You don't need to scream to win. Sometimes, the strongest statement is standing your ground. One paper trail, one permit, one act of courage at a time. I glanced back at the court as another game began under the lights. The sound of sneakers squeaking, the cheers, the laughter. It all rose into the night air, alive and unbroken. "What would you do if your HOA crossed the line?" I said quietly, more to the camera than myself. "Drop your story in the comments, and subscribe for the next fight." Because this wasn't the end of my story. It was the start of everyone else's.